Hello, it's Steph here at the Bead Shop in Nottingham, and I'm going to show you how to set up your jewel loom and also how to set up your warp threads, all ready to get started with your beading on a loom. So the first thing to bear in mind is the loom base is made of plastic, and it allows you to bend it slightly. It's important that you don't over bend it because it can weaken the plastic, and very worst case scenario, you could actually snap it. But the actual curvature of the board allows you to set up your threads across the top here, and then it will keep the tension really nice and taut without you having to do any adjustments while you're working on it. So the way to set it up is to use the little bar here that comes in the set, and these holes on the front, it gets poked in there when it's bent. So the best way to do that, I find, is to poke in one side and then gently bend the other side. I sometimes brace it against my body to do that, but then as soon as it's curved enough, you can just poke it in the other side, and that will hold that nice lovely curve in there while we actually warp the board. So that's a simple bit. My loom is well and truly used. I've made many bracelets and items on here, so it is a little bit more flexible than yours might be being brand new, but you will get there, just slow and gentle to get that in position. And then this is our little reel of thread. There's got a little case on there. I tend to leave that on and then just pull the thread from the spool as I'm doing the warping up. So the first thing we need to do is tie our thread onto the little button at the back on one side. So in order to do that, I usually just tie a loop on one end, on the end of the thread, just by folding the end over and tying an overhand knot. Let's just make that focus a little better. So just going to pull that tight, and that will give you a loop that you can then just hook over the little button on the back here. So that loop there can just slot over, and then we've got our thread to work with. So now we can actually warp up the loom. So the long threads are the warp threads, and when we actually start doing the beading back and forth, they're the wefts. So we're just dealing with the warps to begin with. Now the loom has lots of little grooves or ridges along the ends here, and that is to support your threads. So when we have our thread in between there, it will just help it stabilize and stay in position. It won't slide along the ends here. So we need 8 warp threads. So I tend to just go a little bit off center. You don't have to count the teeth or anything. It's all right as long as it's kept pretty parallel. So we just looped on the back there and come up in between 2 of the ridges. Then we take the thread all the way down to the other side, and again here we're just keeping it parallel. We don't need to, as long as it's not sort of diagonal across here like that, as long as it's pretty straight, and you can kind of do it by eye and use the bar in the middle just to make sure that you're fairly straight. And then on this side we're going through in between 2 ridges and looping round the back here around the button on the other side, and then we're going to come up and go in between the next 2 ridges on this side. So then I'm keeping tension on the thread at all times, so I'm just, as I'm pulling that second thread across, can't quite see it being a light colour, but there we go, we'll then go in between the ridges on the other side. So we're always just going 1 ridge across each time, and then we'll turn it over around the button on the back and then come up along the next. Now we don't need to be pulling it super tight at this stage, but ideally you want to keep the tension on those threads fairly consistent. If you have one that's super tight and then some that are loose, it will have an effect on the overall tension. So just keeping hold of the thread as you're going around the back and then back to the front for the next thread is plenty of tension. Loop round. You kind of get into a bit of the swing of it, and it's a good idea just to keep an eye on how many threads you've got. If you end up with one too many or one less than you need, it will become a problem when we start creating our beadwork. So we're nearly there. Because you've got white thread against a blue board, it's quite hard to count sometimes, so I usually put my hand underneath and that makes it easier to count. So I've got 2, 4, 6, only 7, so I've got one more to go. So round the back there, along the next ridge and down. Now on the back, when we've got the final thread in position, we need to secure it around the button again. Now the first thing I do is just wrap it around a couple of times because that stops you losing the tension, and then we can cut off the thread and then tie that. I often just loop it underneath the threads here. And then tie around itself. Now you want to be careful you don't get caught around these little bars, but as long as that thread is secure and it's not going to come loose while you're working on the loom, that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to do another knot here as well. So once you're happy that there's no chance that can work free, that is sorted. So you can just test that on the front. So they're all kind of a similar tension there. And the magical bit about this loom is when we take this bar out, which is the next thing we're going to do, that is what's going to create an even tension across all of our threads. So the best way to do that, I've found, is by pushing it from the back. Now, if yours is a brand new loom, it might be a little bit stiff to do that. So I tend to work with a little bit of pushing on the back and wiggling on the front. And usually once one side is free, the other side will just pop out. So you might have to work both sides. There we go, popped out. Again, if yours is a brand new loom, sometimes that can make you jump, so just go slow and steady and a little wiggle at a time and that will pop out nicely. And immediately you can see the tension on those threads is really nice and even, and that's going to really help when we start doing our beading to keep everything nice and neat.